Shalom. Wrong language. Shalom. Hello. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. My name is Laura Wharton and I'll be chairing this panel. I teach at the Department of Political Science. I'm also a member of the Jerusalem City Council, so some of the conflicts that one sees countrywide, I see also in the city here. Before we begin and before I introduce our guests, I just want to make three brief comments. One is Dan Meridor, those of you who heard him earlier, made a comment about leadership and leadership by polls and the problem of leadership of that sort. I heard a bit of advice that I thought was very nice the other day, which was that in the situation we're in now, we should do what a person normally does if they're lost in a foggy place and they don't have, they can't see to any great distance. What do you do when you're hiking and this happens? You pull out your compass. And I think pulling out our compass and thinking about what the right thing to do is something we should all be doing now in these very confused times. Second of all, I wanted to point out, I don't know when the people in the audience here heard about this conference, but I heard of it when I was kindly invited by Rafael in the beginning of October, and I just was checking what's happened since this conference was planned. Since the conference was planned, just so we all realize how dynamic the situation is, Iran attacked us on the 1st of October. Yahya Sinwar was killed, Nasrallah was killed, and of course there was this revolution in Syria and Assad and his family were toppled. So when we're talking about what can be, it's very important, I think, to look long distance, but also to realize how dynamic things are. If we're looking also within Israel and the eternal situation and the complicated dynamics of what are happening here, there are also, as you all know, but I'll just point out so many things, moving parts whose results we don't yet know. Things like what will the soldiers be thinking and doing when they come back from the fronts? What will the evacuees be saying when they go home, or if they're left at home any longer? What's going to happen to the economy? What's going to be with the draft bill that is one of the few things that really very clearly divides the coalition. And finally, I was very pleased that Fakir mentioned before, talked about Arab Israelis. If and when, and I hope, Palestinian Israelis get more involved in Israeli politics, they can have with their demographic weight a huge influence on what goes on here. The last comment I just want to make was a comment about the whole conference, which is that I see the fact that there is such a conference as a point of hope in a way. And being a chronic optimist myself, I think it's important to realize that hope is very important in moving anything forward. We have the famous quote from Roosevelt about not fearing anything but fear itself. I think it's something we should take to heart. We can look back in our own history at the terrible pogrom in Kishinev, which ended up being a huge boost to the Zionist movement after Bialik wrote about it and so forth. And finally, a recommendation. There's a great book by a man named Hans Rosling called Factfulness. What the man did was he's an expert on public health and also on statistics, and he asked basic facts about how people see the world, if they're optimistic, pessimistic, what they know. And what he found was not only are people unduly pessimistic, but the most pessimistic and the most wrong in a lot of the questionnaires that he gave about the state of hunger in the world and so forth were the intellectuals. And so I think we should keep that in mind, that we tend to be too critical and maybe too pessimistic when there are points of hope. So, having said that, I'm very pleased and honored to be able to introduce the guests for this panel. We have four, and I'm also very pleased that they're varied men and women and Palestinians and Israelis. Our first speaker will be Fania Oz-Salzberger. She's a historian and author. I assume most people here know her, but in any case, I'll give her all the credit that she deserves. She's a professor emerita at the University of Haifa's Faculty of Law. Her fields include the history of political thought and the Hebrew origins of Western republicanism. A graduate of Tel Aviv University with a doctorate from Oxford University. She's a doctor honoris causa of Uppsala University and member of the Federal Republic of Germany's Order of Merit. In 2021, she won the Grimm Brothers Prize. Oz-Salzberger's numerous books and articles include Translating the Enlightenment from Oxford, and with Amos Oz, Jews and Words from Yale University Press, and most recently she published Deutschland and Israel nach dem 7 October. Her opinion articles appeared in Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, among others. Since the 7th of October 2023, she sounded a public voice for empowering the moderates on both sides of the conflict, and I thank her, as we all do, for that. Thank you. I'll also say I'll sit in the front row and try to time 15 minutes and try to signal you gently and politely when your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, especially ahead of time for the gentleness and politeness. Shalom, salam. It's good to be here in more than one way. This is this meeting, the panel we just heard is, as the Bible says, like a drink of fresh water in the desert. And the desert is very large and fresh water is very hard to find. So I think all of us here feel that something good is going on. I'm very grateful to the IAS, to Rafael Cohen Almago for setting up this wonderful meeting and for having me as part of it. I will be speaking, my topic is reclaiming the basic core of historical Zionism, which I claim, and people can argue against it, was basically universalist and humanist. To reclaim it and adjust it for the day after, for our future. And this is a tough job with many audiences, might not be the toughest in this room. But I would like to make two personal remarks. First, as both a scholar and an activist, maybe even more so as an activist. First of all, biographically, I grew up together with what used to be called the Israeli peace camp. And the Israeli peace camp today does not exist because most of the members of the former peace camp are now members of the democracy camp. And this has to be mentioned. I don't think it's been mentioned earlier, at least not in the panel I was present in, that what is going on today, the assault, the coalition government's assault on Israeli democracy, on Israeli separation of powers, on the Israeli judiciary, is not only an anti-peace move, it is also moving in the direction of dismantling the remnants of Israel as a republic of solidarity. Israeli society, as we knew it, did have Republican, I mean historical Republican, not the current US party elements, did have a powerful sense of solidarity coming from both its liberal roots and its social democratic roots. And this is being undone with the clear intent by the leaders of the current government, ever since January 2023, just a couple of weeks after they formed this government and came to power and started ruling us, and long before the 7th of October of that year, the announced intent of this coup d'etat, because it is a juridical constitutional coup, what is going on, the power and intent, the declared intent of this coup d'etat was first to annihilate the liberals and the so-called liberal institutions, the judiciary mainly, and secondly, to annihilate any hope for civic equality between Jews and Arabs in Israel, and for a peace agreement and a territorial compromise with the Palestinians. This is the intent of the whole judicial coup d'etat, And we, what used to be the Israeli peace camp, already hit hard by the rise of Benjamin Netanyahu, already hit hard by the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and the absence of any follow-up leader for our camp, are now having to back to the inner battlements of our bastion, our falling bastions. So we no longer have the time and presence of mind and energy to defend the idea of peace when we have retreated back into the inner battlements to defend democracy itself. Now, by this, I don't mean, and this is important to say, that there is no peace cohort in Israel. There is a powerful and wonderful set of organizations, NGOs, and individuals. I will name Standing Together. I will name Women Wage Peace, and there are others. I cannot name them all. And plenty of individuals still bearing the banner of peace. But the peace camp, self-called peace camp I was talking about, came in the 1970s from the inner ramparts of Israeli politics itself, and this is where it's missing now. I was about 17 when I sat cross-legged on the floor in my parents' tiny kibbutz apartment and witnessed the establishment of the Peace Now movement by my late father and a wonderful group of younger leaders. And Peace Now carried the flag or the bandwagon of aiming for territorial compromise and the two-state solution ever since the 70s and all the way until it petered out, unfortunately, under the ongoing pro-Hamas regime of Benjamin Netanyahu. Anti-peace, two-state solution, not to mention one-state solution. So we have to mention this here, the catastrophe that is rolling along its way to destroy Israeli democracy in order to explain why so many good Israeli citizens do not now have the energy or the optimism or the hope or the presence of mind to battle for peace. It is not just because of the 7th of October, and it has been mentioned here, the ongoing raw trauma to everyone involved. It is also the fact that we have to defend the precondition for peace, which is democracy, before we can go back to fighting for peace. So this is one personal, general comment. And the second comment is that most of my work since the 7th of October is done as an activist and as a scholar, is done elsewhere, not in Israel, but to audiences abroad, physically or by Zoom. I was in Johannesburg, I was in Oxford recently, I was in New York City, I was in several European cities. And it's going much, much harder than this wonderful meeting of ours here, because the vast majority of involved or semi-involved, quasi-engaged people out there take either one or the other of two extremes. That Israel should disappear, or that the Palestinians should somehow disappear. It is incredible how many people have agreed to jump on the bandwagon of delegitimizing Zionism, the big Z, which has become a swear word all over the social media, all over campuses. Zionism can no longer exist morally or legally or otherwise, and hence this is a tiny step to make. The state of Israel should be on its way out, with the better minds among them suggesting some kind of a vague one state, peace and justice for all, they call it, very vaguely, never taking upon themselves the responsibility to explain how we might get there. Peace and justice for all, and obviously a secular liberal state for Palestinians and Jews. How can this even happen in this generation? I'm afraid it cannot. I'm not saying it is not somewhere in a distant future, but I'm afraid it cannot. In order to acknowledge the alternative to this dreamland one-state solution and to ever-going bloodshed, rivers of blood, the only alternative to both these options is a two-state solution. It has already been discussed here this morning, and coming from the Jewish side, I've been at it since the age of 17. My own lesson from the horrors of the 7th of October and the follow-up horrors of Israel's bad war in Gaza, bad war, the worst war in Israeli history, in many respects, not least the moral. For me, the conclusion, the only bloodless conclusion, is moving slowly towards the two-state solution, which means de-radicalizing both Palestinians and Jews. And I'm totally and fully aware of the need to de-radicalize. I wish I could say de-traumatize. I don't know how you de-traumatize. Multitudes of Jewish Israelis. Not only multitudes of Gazan and West Bank and international community Palestinians. Everyone has to be de-radicalized. It is a very slow process. We need to embark on it. The sooner we embark on it, the more we can hope for the inner dynamics that sometimes happen in history too. The inner dynamics of reconciling not to each other first, but to the very idea of having to reconcile. And to begin moving on towards some kind of a territorial agreement. In order to embrace the two-state solution, you have to be a Zionist. And you have to be a Zionist, here I'm reclaiming, of the old school, what used to be mainstream Zionism, which is based on the very basic definition of favoring a national home for the Jewish people within its ancestral homeland. Within, not all over the place, not river to sea. And this basic core was standing on the powerful feet of Herzl's national liberalism. He was a national liberal. Like most of the Zionists, not all, but most of the Zionist founding fathers and mothers. Both national and liberal, and willing to share the land. So we can go cherry picking like Ilan Pape does, like many other anti-Israelis do. We can go cherry picking, and there have been many racist and morally unacceptable statements by Zionist founders. But this would be cherry picking, because the main program of Herzl, which was the program of Ben-Gurion, give or take, which was the program of the Israeli Declaration of Independence, one of the best constitutional documents of modern nationalism in general, was moderate, was liberal, was based on the humanist assumption of human and civic rights, or civil rights and civic equality. This was the mainstay, despite racism. Even despite what happened in the War of Independence for Israel, the Nakba for Palestinians, and a lot of ugly things happened on both sides. This was the mainstay of original Zionism. The need to reclaim it today is crucial, because not only are the Jews not going anywhere, not only are the Palestinians not going anywhere, but their national aspirations are not going anywhere either. And Zionism should be stripped back to its original meaning of the Jewish national aspiration embedded in the rise of European liberal humanism. So Herzl wanted us to be a nation among nations, to be like the others, to have equal rights to the others, both within the country, domestically and internationally. It was about international equality based on liberal groundwork. And I will end by reminding you that the original Zionist movement, again, give or take some lunacies, but the original Zionist movement was essentially modernist, not postmodernist. It believed in enlightenment, in progress, and in human rights, and in modern statehood, i.e. liberal democracy. It was pragmatic. There was talk about Palestinian pragmatism this morning. It was pragmatic and always very attuned to the international community of which it wanted to be a part, a member, a full appreciated member. Pragmatic in its aspirations. Happy, or if not happy, at least amenable to accept the partition resolution of the United Nations to divide the country into two nation states. And it was pragmatic enough to create itself and declare itself as a democracy of the Jews, but also of all its citizens, because this is the Declaration of Independence. We have left off, we have dropped out of this core mainstream Zionism. We need it back, because without it, we cannot convince our fellow Jews, let alone our Palestinian interlocutors, of the feasibility of the, what I hope is, for a few generations at least, the right solution, the two states. After that, who knows, maybe there will not be any nation states in the world at all. Maybe we'll pass the era of nation states and create some kind of a Middle Eastern or global confederacy. I would have liked to live then, but I live now and I have to finish. And I would like to say that we need to reinvent Zionism for ourselves, for our school curriculum, and hopefully for our future governments, which would not be as monstrous as the current one is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both for the talk and for ending on time. Our next speaker is Hiba Husseini. She's the managing partner of the law firm of Husseini & Husseini. She holds a Juris Doctor from Georgetown University, an MA in Political Science from George Washington University, an MSc in Corporate Finance from the Sorbonne, and a BA in Political Science from the University of Tennessee. She speaks 4 languages and is a member of the State of Pennsylvania Bar and Palestine Bar. The law firm of Husseini & Husseini serves a large domestic and international client base on a wide range of legal matters. She practiced law in Washington, D.C. She chaired the legal committee to final status negotiations between the Palestinians and Israelis and was a legal advisor to the peace process negotiations. She brings innovative thinking to the hard and complex issues involved in the peace process and has written extensively on the subject. She's a political policy advisor and an analyst, and is co-authored with Yossi Beilin, the Holy Land Confederation. She serves on the boards of various educational, professional, cultural, business, and non-profit profit organizations. She served as the vice chair of the Palestine Borsa from 1998 to 2005. She served as a member of the International Advisory Panel of the American Law Institute and contributed to the drafting of the restatement of the law for the Foreign Relations Law of the United States. She serves on the board of trustees of Al-Quds University and the American board of the Middle East Partnership for the Peace Fund, MEPPA. So thank you very much. And here you are. Okay, thank you. And as I said, I'll be here, I'll signal to you in 5 and 15.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you, Professor Raphael. I see many friends here, so I'm also very encouraged, despite the very pessimistic situation on the ground, that we are discussing the future, short term, long term. My paper is divided into 3 sections. I'll give you perspective from a Palestinian day-to-day thinking in terms of what is happening today on the ground. Then I go to what is next for Gaza, and then, of course, what's next for the two-state solution. And for the sake of time, I will also read so that I can go a little bit fast, and I should be on time. The October 7th surprise attack was a day of severe and devastating implications for Israelis, Palestinians, and has jolted the entire region with global impacts that we feel to date. Since then, we have been living very somber days, hardship, and devastating consequences. As soon as Israel awoke from the shock of the attack and hostage-taking, and with the huge military support and financial support from the West, Israel managed to recuperate militarily and has launched a massive retaliation against Hamas in Gaza. Today, 14 months later, the war continues with very severe and grave implications, and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is unprecedented. The death toll, as you see from the presentation, is very high, and the injuries are very high, and most of the Gaza population has been internally displaced. A first ceasefire resulted in the release of some hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Rounds and rounds subsequent to that of negotiations for the ceasefire have failed and have become an end in of themselves. Now we are witnessing what appears to be a more realistic chance for another ceasefire. The dynamics are a bit different, and I'll just name a few. Gaza has become a killing field, and international pressure is mounting. Hezbollah is behind the litany, but the ceasefire is still fragile. Syria's Assad regime has fallen, but no comfort for Israel's security, nor for the Arabs for that matter. And we saw from the Aqaba meetings the fear that especially the Jordanians and the Egyptians are feeling. Iran is deterred, especially after the elimination of Hania, Nasrallah, and other Hezbollah and Iranian and Hamas leaders, but the prospects for escalation remain real. The Israelis who have been displaced from the north have yet to return to their homes and feel secure. Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing his trials for corruption, and polls are forecasting uncertain election prospects, and he is struggling to hold his far-right coalition together. President-elect Trump does not want to take office with wars in the Middle East and may be less inclined than President Biden to provide unquantified arms supplies to Israel. The Israeli economy has taken huge damages and needs years to rebuild. Israel's diplomatic isolation has grown, and the Israeli society is exhausted. Israel's integration in the region has taken a significant hit after years of strengthening ties with Arab countries through the Abraham Accords, while the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco are now having a lukewarm peace. President Biden's dream of a mega deal that would broker peaceful relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia are off the table for the foreseeable future. The ICC and ICJ rulings against Israel and the arrest warrants issued against Netanyahu and Gallant have had significant impacts. For us Palestinians, we continue to face an uncertain future. At the outset of the war, President Biden talked about the two-state solution. This gave us some positive outlook, and we were thinking that maybe finally we will be able to exercise self-determination and be free from occupation in our own state. But this outlook soon vanished, especially as the ceasefire has not been reached. Then settlement expansion in the West Bank has increased with the aim of reaching 1 million settlers, according to statements made by Israeli officials. Israel unleashed Operation Summer Camps in the West Bank refugee camps, and fear of population transfer to Jordan became more and more serious. More and more serious. West Bankers have been detained and killed. There is an increase in arbitrary arrests. There is more house demolitions in Area C and East Jerusalem. All of this contributed to the fear of mass expulsion. The settler violence in the West Bank, especially in the Jordan Valley, has become more and more heightened. We believe that this far-right government is using the war against Hamas as a cover for settling the Palestinian question once and for all, with no prospect for a peace agreement. When Sinwar was killed, Netanyahu declared, "This is not the end of the war. It is the beginning of the end." The policy of continued weakening of the PA and imposing limitations on the transfer of revenue clearances does not support the prospects for peace and security and stability. Given the strained relations between the PA and Israel, most Palestinians never banked on President Abbas nor on Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu. Abbas's rule is not seen as legitimate by many Palestinians due to his unwillingness to hold elections, due to his poor governance and the lack of political vision. Although Hamas is weakened and its influence has diminished, there is much certainty as to the Palestinian internal reconciliation, and the future of this relationship remains unclear. We do not see anything other than continued Israeli control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, with a tighter grip over East Jerusalem and the holy places for the foreseeable future, for the following reasons. Politics failed. Diplomacy failed. The international order is facing major challenges. The Palestinians have failed each other with our national split. Palestinians and Israelis have also failed each other. We also understand that Abbas and Netanyahu will never see eye to eye, and genuine international mediation is not in the horizon. Netanyahu wants to maintain the policy of conflict management, even though this policy has brought nothing but devastation and wars. He has no serious exit strategy from Gaza, and based on all indications, wants to maintain long-term physical military presence there, especially to control the border with Egypt and the border crossings between Gaza and Israel. And to this effect, he is building military bases and roads like the Netzarim corridor, which cuts Gaza into two parts. And he opposes both the deployment of international peacekeeping forces and the PA's return to Gaza. With this grim picture, the question is, what is next for Gaza? The political landscape is not promising. Governance and rule of law will not be easy to achieve. The Palestinian Authority expressed willingness to resume control of Gaza, but this would require significant political and logistical support from Israel, the US, international community, and willing Arab states. Israel so far opposes this. However, the security risks remain high without a unified national Palestinian governance structures between the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The socioeconomic challenges for Gaza are immense. The economy there has been devastated with widespread destruction of the infrastructure. It will take years to rebuild and will require significant international aid and investment and major investment. The humanitarian relief is urgently needed to provide basic necessities like food, water, healthcare, and education. The Gaza population has been displaced, so we need to address this displacement issue. Community rebuilding, and we need to address community rebuilding and restore social cohesion, which will be essential for long-term stability. And we have to strengthen civil society and grassroots movement to help rebuild Gaza. The way I see it, maintaining control in Gaza while carving out land from the already tiny strip for a security zone is a prescription for an ongoing conflict and complicates the prospects for peace and stability in the region. Without leaving Gaza and allowing unification under the PA rule, I do not expect the regional fronts, which are still open, to provide the needed security and stability that Israel seeks. What is next for the two-state solution? There are current challenges which will be very difficult to overcome. Of course, we understand the historical tensions. The conflict has had deep roots, historical deeps, with both sides having strong nationalistic and territorial claims. The recent conflict and the war has further strained relations, with both sides experiencing significant loss and heightened mistrust and trauma. The political situation is complicated by internal divisions within both the Israeli societies and the Palestinian societies, as well as external influences from regional and global actors. The potential path to peace. The two-state solution remains the most widely supported framework for peace, involving the establishment of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. However, reaching this solution requires significant compromises from both sides. The involvement of international actors as mediators, like the United States, Arab states, and other European countries, can play a crucial role in facilitating negotiations and providing support for peace initiatives. And we have to involve civil society and grassroots movements on both sides to contributing to building mutual understanding, fostering dialogue and narrative. The long-term prospects for peace are very well known. Economic interdependence and cooperation can create incentives for peace and security. Security arrangements ensuring the security of both Palestinians and Israelis is essential for any long-lasting agreement. And we have to focus on promoting cultural and education exchanges to help bridges and to bridge the divides and build a foundation for our future peace. And in conclusion, as hard as it may be now, both Palestinians and Israelis have to have a reality check and agree on ending this terrible conflict that has cost us both much too much. We can either work together to realize our interests, to build durable solutions for living in this land, or we can continue to quibble about the past and continue the blame game while maintaining the conflict for generations to come. Pacts, confederations, two-state options are options to consider. We can either think strategically or continue an endless state of conflict management, which has been a failed choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, and thank you for making my job easy. Our next speaker is Samer Sinjlawi. He is the head of international Israeli and diplomatic relations from the Fatah Shadow Leadership and chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund. He's a student of the MA program in conflict resolution at the Swiss Center at Hiba University. He was the head of the international Israeli relations on the Fatah Supreme Committee and was in charge of relations between Fatah and major political parties in Europe and the Arab world, as well as in Israel. Furthermore, he's the Palestinian with the most appearances in Israeli media on channels 11, 12, 13, I-24, and even 14, as well as radio and newspapers. He's published opinion pieces in the New York Times and Newsweek and the Haaretz. And I'd also mention, I know Samer is an activist in Jerusalem, and I've had the pleasure of working with him on projects for Israelis and Palestinians together in the city. So thank you, Samer.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Rafael, for this invitation, and it's nice to be speaking after three remarkable ladies that I respect and adore, Laura and Professor Oz and also Hiba. Well, I'll try to focus on the Palestinian side, although I have a lots of comments on what's happening on the Israeli side, but I learned through my long experience of engagement with Israelis that we should stop lecturing Israelis. We should start being adult and try to have our own self-critics that will help us to improve. And if I want to send a message to the Israelis, I should set an example to the Israelis and not lecture them. The Declaration of Principle is amazing, the Declaration of Independence in Israel. But unfortunately, Fania, if we take it now to the Knesset, only the 8 Arab members will sign it. The Jewish members will, even the Labour Party will hesitate. Nobody now wants to pronounce the two-state solution. When we met in a Zoom webinar with Peter Bernard, it was maybe 5 years ago, I was a one-stater. Now I am a two-stater, two states. I went back to this camp because I think the Jewish people now, regardless Zionism or not Zionism, the Jewish people have the right to have their own Jewish democratic state. And the only way to achieve this is to separate from the Palestinians. Because if there will be a one state, it's going to be a Palestinian state. I don't want this option. Now we are 51% between the river and the sea. So I'll try to speak what should we do. When I was one kid of this city, at the age of 14, when I started to throw stones in the first Intifada, I went to jail at the age of 15 for 5 years. I used to think that we are the good guys, you are the bad guys. Then when I started talking to the Israelis, I said, well, it seems that we have some bad guys, they have lots of good guys. On the 7th of October and after the war, I realized that we are both ugly. And if we are going to defend our ugliness, this is a moral collapse. We should realize how bad this conflict has driven us to the level that we started thinking that everything is permissible. I can do to the other side whatever I want. It's ethical. I can put it in an ethical envelope and sell it, or defend, or don't listen to the others. And it doesn't help us. When I went to Kfar Aza after the 7th of October in a condolences visit there, I've done it because I felt it's very important for us as Palestinians that somebody speaks out. Just for history, to record that at least one Palestinian with some kind of profile went there and in front of camera condemned what has done in our names. It wasn't easy because this drove a lot of backfire against me until now. It's changing now. People are realizing more and more how that moment was responsible. When I was there in Kfar Aza, I stood and on my back, 1 kilometer away, was Bet Lahia burning. I can see the smoke, I can hear the bombs, and I know what's happening there because I see the videos. But at that moment, I didn't want to turn back. I wanted to have my own moral responsibility on condemning what has happened in my name on the 7th of October. What's happening there, I leave it to some Israeli. I would like to see some Israeli coming one day and saying, we have done terrible things there. And it's not, nothing can be justified. We both had different options. On the 7th of October, I think the Palestinians had different options. Whether the one who took the decision was Sinwar or Hamas, but it's done on the name of the Palestinians. I think we have had choices. And in the reaction to the 7th of October, the Israelis had other choices, but they have chosen to do and achieve whatever they wanted to achieve over the bodies of 50, 60,000 Palestinians, including 20,000 kids. For me, ethically, I think I don't want to see a Palestinian state over the body of 1,200 Israelis that were killed that day. And I think the Israelis should question whether the only way to achieve security or to react to what has happened was the 50,000 bodies in Gaza. Anyhow, what should we do as Palestinians? I think we should start by something that is related to the root of this conflict. This conflict is two narratives that are fighting each other. But if we look at both narratives, And if we change small item in these narratives, these two narratives can be one narrative that can unite us. If we, the Palestinians, come and say, why should I deny the historical rights of Jews in this country? It's a matter of fact. Jews has lived there for thousands of years. I should recognize the historical rights of Jews to everywhere in this country, to Hebron, to Shechem, to Beit El, wherever. But I want to remind the Jewish people that they have never been alone in this place. There was always others, and these others are us. Now, we would like to identify ourselves as Palestinians, and we have the right. You have the right to identify yourself as Jewish national identity, the people of Israel, and we have the right to identify ourselves as the Palestinian people. So this will change the way of thinking. We need to change the way we both think, and we need to change leadership. Because I don't believe that you have only 100 hostages in the bunkers of Hamas in Gaza. There are 7 million Israeli Jews who are hostages in the bunker of Bibi for 15 years. And there are 7 million Palestinians, including the Israeli Arabs, maybe, who have been kidnapped in the bunkers of Abbas for 20 years. I come from Fatah, and I know President Abbas very well. When we used to visit him 35 years ago, when he first came, and some people think that he is only the leader for 20 years, but he was number 2 since 1965. The Palestinian people have witnessed only 3 leaders in 100 years. Haj Amin Husseini, Arafat, and Abu Mazen. And everything that went wrong on behalf of the Palestinians, if you take the list of what did the Palestinians do, and it was wrong to do, and what did the Palestinians did not do, and it was not good not to do, both lists are the decision of 3 people. And none of them have consulted us. Have you heard that somebody came in a referendum to the Palestinians and asked them, do you support or you don't support the division plan, the partition plan in 1947-48? None. One person took the decision. So we used to visit President Abbas, and each time we meet him, at that time Arafat isolated him in a small office in Arisal Street in Ramallah. He ended each meeting into a phrase that I remember. He always said, you are the leaders of tomorrow. 37 years later, this tomorrow never came. The young Israelis that I used to meet from the Labour Party or Meretz Party or the Likud Party in '96 became members of the Knesset. They became ministers. They are retired now, and we are still waiting for a possibility to do something. If we start by changing the narrative, and if we as Palestinians come to the conclusion that our current strategy is a broken strategy, our strategy now is focused on 2 things: using pressure against the Israelis locally by using violence, and trying to mobilize the world against the Israelis. Israelis don't work, don't react positively to pressure. They become more stubborn. The only way to achieve something with Israelis is to try to persuade them. We need to enter your hearts and minds if I need to move away. President Abbas thinks that if he continue the scoring of those countries recognizing the state of Palestine, then this is the way for us to achieve something. If he will be able to get 192 states out 194 states to recognize the state of Palestine, and the 2 states, Israel and USA, don't recognize it, it's like nobody is recognizing it. I need only 1 state to recognize the state of Palestine, it's Israel. So why do I need 152? Now we have 156 embassies. There is some kind of parity between Israel and Palestine. 164 countries recognize Israel, 156 countries recognize Palestine. Why do I need to increase the number of embassies? Singapore has 2 embassies in Africa. We have 34 embassies in Africa. If I will be one day the Prime Minister, I will close all of these embassies. I will keep 10 maybe in Berlin, Washington, London, Riyadh. And I will open a liaison office in each neighborhood in Israel. I need to convince the Israelis. Nobody else will help me. Even one day, if Rashida Tlaib will be the president of the USA will not pressure Israel to do something the Israelis don't want to do. Because Israel is, in the minds of the Americans, is a democracy. I've heard a top official in the State Department, number 2, recently, telling us in a meeting, we cannot push Netanyahu to end the war because the Israeli people don't want to end the war. We know it. The Israelis are not deciding. We are not in 1983, where Reagan pushed Begin to end the war and get out of Lebanon. The Israelis support the continuation of the war. So this is our best chances. We need to develop a Palestinian strategy that is based on nonviolence, that puts in its basis providing security to the Israelis, not to do them a favor, out of a Palestinian national interest. And then we need to help the Israelis to start thinking in a way that they need to. An Israeli strategy that puts the human dignity, freedom, and well-being of the Palestinians on its basis, not out of charity to the Palestinians, out of an Israeli national interest. If these 2 strategies start playing in front of each other, building trust in an equation of more for more, the more I provide security to you, the more you provide freedom to me, until we reach to the decisions. The majority of Israelis and Palestinians are capable to coexist, even now when it looks in polls something different. I go to Mount Scobus campus there, and I see a group of students, our students and your students, they're putting the same necklace, the whole map. Where there is a difference between our necklaces and your necklaces, you have the Golan height added. And both necklaces are product of the same factory in China, they just sell it. Now, do you think that any of these students is really intending to throw the other side to the sea? Bullshit. The fact that they come to the same university and they go to the same classes and listen to the same professors. And sometimes the professor asks a group of students, 2 Palestinians, 2 Israelis, each with his necklace to do a group work, a group research. They start working together. One of them could be from the reserve that comes with his military form and M16 to the classroom, with his boots with the dust of Gaza, and he's working with a Palestinian, and the Palestinian is able to work with him. By nature, we are capable to live and coexist. But it's the leaders who have manipulated our minds and took us where we think is the best interest to us, to the extreme. So the chances are high. We need to change the way we think and our leadership, and then the 2-state solution is closer to us than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samar, for your talk. And also, I must say thank you for your bravery. The things that he's saying, he says not only to us here, but elsewhere, and it's not easy, and I think it's a great thing. Our next speaker is Nimrod Goren. He's a senior fellow for Israeli Affairs at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., president and founder of Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, and co-founder of Diplomeds, the Council for Mediterranean Diplomacy. Nimrod holds a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from the Hebrew University and was a Hubert Humphrey Fellow at Syracuse's University Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. He was a teaching fellow on Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University and has also worked at the Harry S. Truman Research Institute for the Advancement of Peace, that's where I know you're from, the Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies, and the Nehemiah Lev Zion Center for Islamic Studies. He is a past recipient of the Victor J. Goldberg Prize for Peace in the Middle East and the Centennial Medal of the Institute of International Education, as well as a member of the International Dialogue Initiative. His fields of expertise include Israel's foreign policy and regional relations, the Middle East peace process, and unofficial diplomacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure being here, not only because of the title of the conference and the work for peace, but also because of the hope that this last panel is bringing, because each of the three speakers before me were people that are actually engaging and reaching out to different audiences, whether Israelis and Palestinian and international. And that's the kind of thing that I thought I would bring to this discussion, because I could talk about policy ideas and insights, but I thought it may be more interesting to bring some of the process-relevant reflections on the type of work that I had the opportunity to do over this last year or two, because since the mid-90s, that's the time that you refer to in your talk, I've been involved in different Israeli initiatives working with the region, but over the last 2 years, I've been involved with a regional or international organization that actually brought a situation in which my daily work is done with Palestinians and Arabs within the same organization. So it's less about dialogue, it's actually about working together in the same space. And during this year, since October 7, was quite an experience, okay, with a lot of lessons. The sense is that the Israeli society is becoming less and less aware of that. Many people here in the room have lots of experience in engaging with colleagues from other countries, in talking with Palestinians, with Arabs, but over the last years, what I see, at least with the younger generation, is that this type of work is almost non-existent anymore. So students within this university, I would be surprised if there is a large number of them who actually spend quality time for multiple days with Palestinian or Arab colleagues. So the Israeli society is becoming more inward-looking, less aware of international debate, international discourse, and of valuable exchanges with Arab and Palestinian colleagues. So that's one reason, to bring some of those insights from the international exchanges into a society that does less and less of them. Less and less is partly because the Israeli-Palestinian civil society, which was mentioned a lot, is less doing the cross-border work compared to what we did in the past, and that Israeli cooperation or engagement with people from Arab countries is by definition even less than what used to be with the Palestinians. So if you think about Israeli-Egyptian, Israeli-Jordanian, Israeli-Lebanese, Israeli-Syrian channels, those are very few and have been traditionally very few compared to the Israeli-Palestinian ones. So all of that comes together with the messages that Fahira and Hiba and Sami were speaking about, the importance of civil society and enhancing this type of engagement, this type of unofficial relationship, unofficial diplomacy, regional policy dialogues, things that are happening on the unofficial language level but are carrying a lot of weight and I hope will be enhanced. So that's kind of the intro, and I'm going to provide a bit of a context to this field of action, to talk a bit about the nature of the dialogue itself, the discussions about potential impact of that, what difference does it make, and about the people. And all of that in a very short time, so it will be kind of a very brief concept. So first, unofficial diplomacy, when we talk about it, it's not only about individuals who are advancing unofficial peace plans, it's basically a field that brings together people that are either coming from the former officialhoods, former ambassadors, former officials, or coming from social change. So it's a mix of two types of people, one's coming more from the grassroots and one coming more from the governmental side of things. It's kind of small, it's kind of elitist, it's happening usually away from the public eye, so it doesn't make a lot of resonance in the public debate, but it aims to bring some real value, both in terms of socializing elites, exchanging information and perspective and understanding how things are seen by different audiences in different places, to generate new ideas, to test policies that others are putting on the table, to advise different international actors, to look for zones of possible agreements, to see where vetoes exist and how they can be bypassed. So a lot of back-channel policy planning that is often a bit ambiguous in the results, but leads to very interesting and meaningful engagement with officials in the region, in the international community, that try to make some diplomatic investment in here to make sure that what they do is really effective. And that there was an uptick in that after the Abraham Accord. There was more regional dialogues happening. We saw more integration of Israel into the regional landscape. We even saw NGOs coming to life here in Israel as well that are doing the regional work, trying to carry the spirit of the Abraham Accords into regional dialogues. But all of that kind of began to change since the coming to power of the current coalition, the far-right coalition that we currently have, that slowed down a lot of the bilateral and regional cooperation modalities that we saw. And the concern after October 7 within the scope of civil society and regional cooperation spaces was, will it survive or not? After a year of a difficult coalition in Israel, will another year of war lead to a collapse of all of this field of action? And gladly I can say that it didn't. It limited, it changed, but it didn't. So going to some of the basic elements of the dialogue itself, the takeaways of that. First, I think it's very genuine to say that Israel has partners for peace in the region. Okay, we hear it from all over the Arab world. People who come and speak with Israelis in closed doors, even in official and public spaces, and say the Arab world is showing his hand for peace to Israelis. And if Israel picks it up, transition will happen in the region. The seeds of that, of course, is the Arab Peace Initiative some years ago, and we heard it more and more, but recently that's a very common language that we hear from people in the Arab world. And beyond the messaging, it's very important to acknowledge that Israelis and Palestinians can actually do civil society engagement together, even at times when the conflict is at its peak. So many of the international government that try to intervene and invest in civil society activism do not believe that you can actually bring the sides to the table during such a year of war. But experience shows that when you do it in the correct manner, you pay attention to sensitivities, you bring the right people, you shape the right objectives, you can bring Israelis and Palestinians to work together in a cross-border modality, even during a year of war. And when you look at policy issues, and not only doing the grassroots people-to-people traditional aspects, the policy-oriented civil society work can bring value. And Gershon and Samer are running around the world and promoting their plan, and Hiba and Yossi Beilin are doing the same. So you see the doors are very much opening when people, Israelis and Palestinians, are coming with their initiatives. People want to hear about it. So there's impact that is being there, and when it's being done under an international umbrella, it's a bit easier, of course. So think that under the head of the Mitvim Institute here in Israel, it was very difficult to do with Arab colleagues. Doing that through an international organization, a Middle East Institute in Washington, or diplomats in Europe, it becomes much easier. And if you change a bit the landscape and say, well, instead of looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or issue as a Middle Eastern issue, we also look at it as a Mediterranean issue, it's become even easier. Not only easier, but also opening up all kind of new opportunities, and that's something that is boiling within the international debate, less popular yet in Israel. But I'm not sure how many know that Israel and Palestine, as Palestine, sit together into international organizations, the Union for the Mediterranean in Barcelona, the East Med Gaz Forum, based in the East Med, Cyprus, Egypt, and in those places the Netanyahu government actually ratified the charter that says Palestine, okay, because it serves the need. So within the Mediterranean you have a space of cooperation, of engagement that does not happen between Israelis and Palestinians. When you look at it as a Middle Eastern issue, when you bring Cyprus and Greece and Turkey and Egypt into play, you see other opportunities, and that's, I think, an important lesson when we talk about this conflict. So audiences are more open to hear new ideas. During the time of war, people are confused, people have question marks, people want to see actors from the region come together and think together and bring together new ideas. Well, there is quite a big aspiration by people involved in these channels to make a lot of impact, to bring this game-changing idea that will solve the conflict. At the beginning of the war, I sensed a lot of frustration. The reality was overwhelming. People said, we had all these solutions, but how can we address what's actually happening? And it led to two processes. One of such channels, back channels, track to diplomacy, being very much satisfied with reaching a small idea on which there could be a consensus, So even if it's small, but if it's feasible, if it's practical, if you can actually implement it, maybe that's a better way to go than bring the big idea that nobody will implement on the ground. So that was one aspect of that. The other was the very personal aspect of it, of people finding value in sitting in an environment in which positivity lies, okay? With such a negative atmosphere around, so much conflict around us, having like-minded partners within the region sit together, even if nothing comes out of it, for many people that was meaningful enough to engage during this year of war. It wasn't like that usually in the past. People wanted something very concrete to come out of debates, and I think as the war went by, people were more and more willing to engage in dialogues that practically are not really leading anywhere, but bring together positive actors from the region to sit together. And it relates to how the reactions to October 7th among Arab colleagues that engaged with Israelis took shape, and there was quite a variety in that. And it's not always predictable. So as an Israeli engaging in this conversation in conferences and reaching out to people from the Arab world, it became very difficult to know what will be the reaction when you step up and identify yourself as an Israeli. Because some colleagues in the region took a step towards advocacy. And Israelis were doing the same. You know, it was mentioned by one of the speakers, going into supporting your side very strictly, very bluntly. And that's it. We are justifying one side. Others prefer to disengage, to say it's too complicated, you know, why bother now? Personal risk for some people, others, so it's more difficult. But there was a third group that was stepping up and willing to go out of their comfort zone. People from countries that never met Israelis before were sensing this urgency, this need of doing something for their own personal stake in the conflict, because everybody suffered losses in this year, and were willing to take planes and meet Israelis in very quiet settings, doing that for the first time ever and acknowledging the fact that they are taking a big risk. And when you do that, you need to acknowledge the personal component of those conversations. So even you talk interests and geopolitics, eventually these are people, and everybody has a story after October 7th. Everybody comes to the table with something very personal that either drove them there or impact their thinking. And more of these conversations that used to be kind of big picture, high-level analysis became very personal. And the social psychology aspect came much more into the room, and I think became a much more dominant factor. Because eventually it's, and we saw it, the fear is in every room, sometimes very unexpected. You know, sitting with an Arab friend for many years, but the moment he sees my phone, it was like, put it away so it doesn't explode. Okay, so you know, all kind of stories that you see the fear enter the friendships, the rooms, the trust conversation that you had before. There's of course a lot of cautious on public appearances with Israelis now. So just came back from a conference in Rome in which I think we were 2 Israelis and there were 4 Arab speakers that dropped out of panels just not to appear on the program with an Israeli speaker. So there's a lot of sensitivity that wasn't there, even when we are talking about a closed room setting. And of course, there is a gap between the public and the private messaging. I think that was very striking to see how people talk when they engage public audiences and the types of things that they tell you when you engage with them beyond a closed door, whether condemnation of October 7, how they respond to Israeli attacks or Israeli military objectives. So that was sometimes surprising. Another striking factor was the different realities that people live in. And you know, that's something we always have. People live different stories, they see different things on the media, but I think during this year it was much more intensified. It leads to a situation when people meet, when Israelis and Arabs are sitting together, they have a totally different construct of reality and a totally different set of facts on which a discussion begins. And this gap was much wider than I think we saw before. At the beginning, people tried to ridicule it, and this is a conspiracy theory, this is fake news, but as time goes by and more information comes out, it became evident that each side has some truth in what they present, and it's worth listening to what the other side narrative, because sometimes what we see is limited picture and what they see is limited, but each other brings something that the different side does not see it. A key to the success of such engagement is going beyond the confrontational nature of dialogue that is very common for Israelis, to a place of empathy and acknowledgement and willing to listen to criticism and accept criticism even if not agreeing with that, but having a sort of dialogue that is very different in nature than the type of dialogue that we offer here. And maybe finally, because time begins to run out, the personalization of issues. You know, how much on the Arab side, whatever happens in Israel is Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Smotrich. And those are kind of, everything goes there. And they need to explain that there are processes within the Israeli society that go much beyond, okay? That even if we have different leadership in place, some of the basic concepts in our national security strategy, our mindset will not really change. And I think that's, on one end, it's positive because we saw when Naftali Bennett came to be prime minister, as a right-wing and hawkish leader, he was very openly accepted in different Arab capitals because he was not Netanyahu. So it has benefits, but then when you set expectations, I think it's very important to acknowledge, you know, what's the difference? And for many, I think in the Arab countries, also in Europe, it was difficult to see the Israeli partners that support components of the war while opposing Netanyahu. It didn't really make sense, and it shattered quite a bit of the international alliances that were set in place during the year of democratic protests. So eventually, I think, and I will close with that, the most striking and disturbing message was the Israeli peace camp is gone, okay? And I heard that multiple times, that the peace camp is gone. Israel doesn't have a peace camp anymore. The perception of Israel as a war lover and the Arabs as peace seekers, and hearing that as an Israeli who has been invested a lot in promoting peace and work within circles that are committed to that, I think that's a message that we need also to reflect domestically, but also convey to the external world, and to make sure that eventually we are looking into homegrown solutions, and what we need to build comes from the inside, go through leadership chain, go through community investment, civil society building, cross-border work, and that's the type of thing that I hope more and more will be engaged with, and I hope these insights were somewhat interesting. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nimrod, and I would again like to thank all four of the speakers in the panel. I thought it was very interesting. I hope you all agree with me. We now have about 15 minutes for questions. What I suggest we do is maybe we'll take 2 questions at a time and then ask the panelists to answer. If the people from the panel could sit in the first row, I think it would be easier, because if they're directed to you, be able to reach them faster.
I have a question to Fania. You described a narrative or vision. I don't know it. You know, it's for me a very new one, because I know something different. The dream of Zionists already in 1937 was about extending the territory as much. Ben-Gurion was autocrat very much, that I believe his signs we have today. What? Question? No, it's a question. How do you find this narrative that you describe? It's not real, because, as I said, beginning of Israel state was completely autocratic, and we have the signs from the beginning left, and they influenced the development of Israeli state. For today, it's a kind of extreme of this, but it was before. Israel was never liberal democracy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Samer, I was very happy to hear him. Also in the ironic way that he spoke, we need the ironic ironia now. I agree with him about everything that he criticized the leadership of the Palestinian. Really, it's right, very important things. But he spoke, Samer, that the Palestinians must convince Israel that they want peace. They don't want to bother Israel, and that's very important. But I think one thing, you can say a lot of things about Abu Mazen. He's not democratic. He doesn't encourage the new generation to be in the leadership circles. But in this point, I think Abu Mazen made a very brave suggestion, a very brave step when he said, I don't want military struggle. I don't want to fight Israel by soldiers. I want citizen civic struggle. And yes, and so I think, and what the answer from Israel, what was the answer? They went to Hamas. They gave Hamas $15 million every day, every month. So I don't think that the problem is what the Palestinian show to Israel. Even Israeli military forces said that the cooperation between the Palestinian military, not military, بتحوني ماذا بتحوني what you said is very excellent. They prevent a lot of things. So I think the last thing in this field that we can say about Abu Mazen, that he didn't make this step. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if Fania, Oz-Salzberger, and Samuel, if you can come and respond to questions.
It was nice to get two questions from the two different groups with the internal domestic critique, which I liked. We cannot, at this point, sir, go through the narrative clash between us, within Israelis themselves. There are narrative clashes. I stick by the narrative that raised me, which was humanist Zionism. This was my childhood story. This was my childhood truth. I have learned a lot of things that have undermined this narrative, and yet, from my own scholarly work about the historical origins of the Israeli judiciary and the Israeli Supreme Court, many of whom the founders of the Israeli Supreme Court were German educated in the years of the Weimar Republic. And it is very interesting, important to see how the Israeli democracy begins its life as a flawed democracy. It is still a flawed democracy. I think it is even more so today, a flawed, imperfect democracy, and yet democracy it was from the start. And democracies are by definition liberal democracies. There is no such thing as an illiberal democracy. It had deficits. It had deficits, but what it had from the very start was a separation of powers, which we are now sorely losing. And what it had from the very start is a Supreme Court able to put forward verdicts during the War of Independence in 48, 49, against Ben-Gurion and against the government, and not only get away with it, but Ben-Gurion deeply respected the court. And he deeply respected the Attorney General. And he deeply respected the State Comptroller, Mevaker HaMedina. So there were the core elements, imperfectly, of democracy were there and developed further when the emergency law was lifted from the Arab citizens of Israel in the mid-1960s. Now, whether or not it's my childhood narrative, whether or not my wish to defend Israel's democratic legacy is based on sentimentalism of my own upbringing, maybe, I don't know, but one thing is for sure. Zionism is here to stay in the minds and narratives of most of the 7 million Jewish Israelis between the river and the sea, including not least many ultra-Orthodox, who secretly or not so secretly present themselves as Zionists, not my kind of Zionist, right-wing kind of Zionist. So my struggle to bring back Zionism to its core, to its simple and humanist core, is also a pragmatic one, not only because it's my life story, not only because I believe there have been good intentions on part of many of the Zionist founding generations, but also because we have no other way, just the way that Palestinian national aspirations are here to stay. Some Palestinians tell me that it's problematic, but it's there. Jewish national aspirations are here to stay. That's Zionism. That's all it takes. So I will leave it at that, and we have a lot of narrative ground to cover, perhaps some other time.
Thank you.
Well, he's pro non-violence. He doesn't have Israeli blood on his hands, but he has Palestinian blood on his hands. Just 3-4 days ago, 2 Palestinians were shot and killed in Jenin. Now you tell me that he needs to restore order, fine. At least I want him to treat us the way the Israeli army is treating settlers. He's treating us the way the Israeli army is treating Palestinians. And we cannot take this. We cannot accept this. He could not convince Palestinians, and he could not convince Israelis because, okay, he says I am pro non-violence, and he denies, he's a denial of Holocaust. For God's sake, why should any Palestinian enter into this discussion? The only thing that we are not blamed of is Holocaust. Why do I need to argue on this? Every time he opens his mouth, so he couldn't gain the trust of Israelis, he couldn't gain the trust of Palestinians. And this is why he couldn't succeed with, he has done business with 9 Israeli prime ministers out of 14. With 6 American presidents. He didn't succeed with any one of them. So something wrong is with this guy. A change of leadership is a must. And a change of leadership should bring a change of thinking, a change of strategy. Why should I be responsible more than the Israelis in taking the first step? Because they can survive another 75 years in this conflict. Okay, they are paying a price. They have kids who fall down every day in the war. But they are an OECD country. They still have a nice passport and Ben Gurion that connects them with the world. Still they are, they have a life. I cannot stay another 75 hours in this conflict. So I have more responsibility to start the first step of change that can impact them and force them to see example of Palestinians that tell them we should also change. They are changing, we should change. So we have more responsibility than them in taking the first steps.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Gershon, sorry. No, take one more.
My question is to Fania also.
Please try to make it short because we're actually a little over time already.
I'm an Israeli because of Zionism. I made Aliyah 46 years ago, but I can't call myself a Zionist, nor do I want to call myself a Zionist, because everything that's done and has been done in the name of Zionism. And I would like to suggest to you a different formula. I'm an Israeli, and we need to make Israel a just state that has equality for all of its citizens. And we need to leave Zionism to history.
It will be very quick. Okay. Gershon, I'm full of admiration for you. I follow you on and offline. You are doing wonderful things. And yet I have to say the following thing to every non-Zionist or anti-Zionist left-winger who really wants peace. You cannot do it without us, the Zionist left. Stop making the Zionist left into your worst enemy. We are not your worst enemy.
I'm not saying you're my enemy. I'm saying that us, the so-called Zionist left, need to change our frame of reference.
Mm-hmm. So many people need to change around here. I'm not sure the Zionist left should be the first. What I'm telling you is that once we manage to rescue Israeli democracy, yes, what you call justice, Israeli justice and democracy, we will be back in our thousands out there in the streets for peace, and we will still call ourselves Zionists. So whether or not we like this, see it as a discrepancy or as a potentially harmonious combination, there is such a thing as a Zionist peacenik, and always has been. And hopefully will change history in the future. תודה רבה.